Today is fulfilling psychological needs. I want to run a scenario by you and see how you respond, whether you identify with this or not. You're taking an exam, and in the middle of the exam you develop a headache, a disturbing headache. Maybe not a migraine, but a disturbing headache. And in an office 10 minutes away, you have aspirin. Now, of course, if you go get the aspirin and come back, it's going to cost you 20 minutes, but you have a headache. And a headache makes it much harder to think and answer on an exam. Compare that, and I think most people would go and get the aspirin because you want to do the best you can on the exam, and the headache is wearing down your performance. Now compare that with taking the exam. About halfway through, you're just crashingly bored. How much medieval French poetry can you take? And you know that stepping outside for 20 minutes, getting a breath of fresh air, maybe taking a walk around the garden, would refresh you and you'd feel much more confident and much more focused in taking the exam. Would you take the 20 minutes to take a breather outside as often with the same sense of self-confidence as going to get the aspirin? Or would you say, listen, an aspirin is a physical pain, and physical pains are difficult, and it's appropriate to take care of them. Boredom? That's just an attitude. Get a grip on yourself, Don't give in to that kind of weakness. Stiff upper lip, as our British cousins would say, and tough it out. Would you feel guilty if you took the 20 minutes to relieve your boredom, as opposed to taking the 20 minutes to relieve your headache? Now, I don't know whether everybody feels this way, but there are definitely people who feel if it's a psychological need, then you have a responsibility to be tough and function even without satisfying it. But if it's a physical need, that's something else. There, it's perfectly appropriate to make sacrifices in order to satisfy the physical need. Now, I think that given there is such an intuition, such an experience, it's important to know that Jewish sources don't support this. Jewish sources treat psychological needs strictly on a par with physical needs. Here's one way to measure it. Ask yourself, what will be the consequences of denying the need? If they'll be equally severe in both cases, the fact that one is physical and one is psychological makes absolutely no difference. There's no prejudice against psychological needs. I'll give you a few examples. The Gemara talks about one's responsibility for charity. And there are two verses, one which says you should give him, the poor person, what he needs, and the other indicates that you shouldn't give him more than he needs. So the Gemara says, what would it be like to be considering giving him something more than he needs? Well, now remember, this is a Talmudic period. If you are considering using your charity money to buy him a horse or rent him a servant, that would be beyond his needs, and that would not be an appropriate use of your charity money. Unless, and the reader says, unless, you mean there could be a time when it's appropriate to use your charity money to buy him a horse and get him a servant? And the Talmud said, yes, let's suppose this person grew up in wealthy circumstances, and now he's lost everything, and because he doesn't have what he's used to, he feels depressed and irritated and unsure of himself, and he lacks self-confidence. And buying him a horse and getting him a servant will restore his psychological health. then it would be appropriate to use charity money to buy him a horse and get him a servant. There's another example. The Gemara on Shabbos considers the appropriateness of having an operation on one's face in order to improve the appearance of the face. Maybe it's a scar or something. So the Gemara's first thought is, well, if that feature of the face is causing you pain, then for sure it's appropriate to have surgery. Tosfos asks, suppose the pain is just psychological. He knows that his appearance repels people. When the Gemara says it's appropriate to have this operation to relieve pain, was psychological pain included? And Tosfos says, of course. Psychological pain is pain. So whether it gives you a stabbing sensation or whether people look away from you, pain is pain, and therefore the operation is appropriate. In the Shmona Prakim, that's the Rambam's introduction to Pirkei Avos, in the 5th chapter, he discusses the principle of doing everything for the sake of heaven. Everything to draw closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he says, as an example, consider how such a person would eat. He would not choose his menu on the grounds of its being physically tempting menu. He would eat that which is good for him. If it happens to taste good, there's nothing wrong with that, but he certainly isn't going to choose the things that taste good because they taste good. Unless, and again, the reader says, unless, I mean, there'll be times when it would be appropriate to look for the pleasure of the taste of the food. And he says there are people who lose interest in nutrition, who lose interest in eating. Now, as you'll see, this is not anorexia, but it's something milder. And therefore, they start to lose weight. Older people sometimes, by the way, lose interest in eating. They just don't think about it. And they lose weight in a dangerous fashion. Says the Rambam, for such a person, you would have to hire a gourmet chef to prepare the most attractive, the most tantalizing food dishes, so as to reignite his interest in food, so as to make sure he gets proper nutrition. That's obvious. Then the Rambam goes on to say that a person who lives in drab and ugly surroundings can become depressed. And therefore it would be appropriate to spend money on either making his surroundings more attractive or taking time to experience beauties of architecture and poetry and nature so as to prevent becoming depressed. To the extent, says the Rambam, it might be appropriate to sew golden threads in your clothes and paint golden murals on the walls. All for the sake of heaven. Because without it, the person feels depressed, upset, unfocused. And if that's what he needs, then that's a legitimate use of the money that he has. So again, by juxtaposing diet and nutrition on the one hand with depression or other kind of psychological disorder on the other hand, by juxtaposing them, the Rambam is saying that this one is physical and this one is psychological, makes no difference. It's appropriate to take care of these needs. One of the Rosh Yeshivas of Telz in Europe, I guess this was like 150 years ago, wrote a series of essays, and one of his essays is called Palis Magal Raglecha, which means make a circle around your feet, as if to say, this is the boundary that I shouldn't step over. And in this essay, he asked the following question. We know that there is a mitzvah to learn Torah for a man at all times when he isn't doing any other mitzvah. No time off. The verse in the book of Joshua says, meditate on it or speak in it day and night. However, there are obviously times when it's appropriate to stop learning. For example, you have to sleep. Because if you can't sleep, you won't be able to learn. So there are definitely times where you have to eat. And although it's probably forbidden to mention this subject in the yeshiva, there may even be times when you have to work to earn a living so as to be able to have food to eat and so on and so on. Those things actually do happen. So everyone agrees that even though it's a mitzvah encompassing all the other time you're not doing other mitzvahs, but there are needs for which it is appropriate to stop learning. What is the criterion? What is the criterion for when you're stopping for a while? Stopping learning is appropriate. And the author says, you'll tell me it's a physical criterion. You have to stop to sleep, you have to stop to eat, and so forth and so on. Says the author, that's wrong. That's not the correct criterion. Because stopping for the sake of your psychological health is also legitimate. It doesn't have to be physical, it can also be psychological. And now he goes into considerable detail on this subject. Okay, psychological health, psychological needs, what are they? What state of your psychology is worth stopping Torah study to invest in? Well, here's his list. A person should feel happy, strong, optimistic, self-confident, and joyful. How's that for a list? The ideal person should feel happy, strong, optimistic, self-confident, and joyful. So anything you do to stop learning Torah in order to feel this way would be legitimate. Now, the author is very thorough. What kinds of cessations, what kinds of activities will contribute to feeling happy, strong, optimistic, self-confident, and joyful? And he gives a list. Aesthetics, like the Rambam said, beauty, or inspiring aesthetics. Nature, relaxed conversation, not just, what did you learn in the Rashi? And what did he say in the Mr. Shmooze? But how are you doing? What are your plans for your next vacation? You know, what do you hear from home? Just relaxed vacation, conversation, and physical pleasure. Stopping Torah study in order to have some physical pleasure, which will influence your strong, optimistic, self-confident, joyful, and happy psychology, is an appropriate stopping of Torah study. This doesn't sound familiar. It's not a common subject in the kinds of shmoozing that you hear in yeshivas. They don't often address this subject, but this is one of the Rosh Yeshivas of Tel Yeshivas, so you can't get any more yeshivic than that. So, and by the way, this appeal to physical pleasure, since probably you haven't heard of this essay by Tel Yeshiva, but in the Mesilas Yesharim, the Path of the Just, so-called, in the first chapter, he also says a certain amount of physical pleasure is necessary for appropriate service of Hashem. He says physical pleasure produces nachas ruach and yishuv hadas. Nachas ruach is a kind of satisfaction, a kind of feeling at home in your life and in the world, feeling that things are okay. And yishuv hadas means your mind can be focused on something. And he says a certain amount of pleasure is necessary to open a person's heart so that he can have these two qualities of sort of satisfaction and calmness, feeling at home, and the ability to focus his mind. So all of these things are considered to be appropriate activities for stopping Torah study. Now, the Telz Rosh Yeshiva goes on to ask another question, which shows you the extent to which he's serious about this. Surely this isn't infinite. Surely there's a boundary. However much aesthetics and nature and relaxed conversation and physical pleasure you need in order to promote the strength of your psychology is appropriate. But there could be a limit beyond which it really won't have that effect anymore. And that will be unnecessary. And then when it's unnecessary, it's inappropriate. How do you draw the line? To know how much you really need and how much is inappropriate. Now, the really interesting thing here is, as I remember it, he doesn't actually draw the line, but he makes an extremely important observation. He says, let's imagine a person trying to draw the line. So here he is. He's been learning in a July afternoon in an air-conditioned base medrash. That's what Ohr Somayach used to be 25 years ago. And it's hot and it's dry, and he's been learning for 2.5 hours, and another 2 hours to the Seder, and he wants a Coke. He wants a Coke. He's thirsty. And, a cup of water won't do. He wants a Coke. And there's a canteen. It'll take him 5 minutes to go and get the Coke. 5 minutes. 5 minutes loss of learning. What could be worse than that? Well, according to this essay, it could be an appropriate thing to do. Yeah, but not 3 Cokes. Not 3 Cokes. He knows that he certainly doesn't need 3 Cokes. 2? Well, I'm not sure. Maybe it would help the second Coke. Maybe it wouldn't. I'm really not sure. Might be, might not be. Now listen, I'm a serious person. I'm not playing around here. I want to do things right. So here's what I've done. I've kept record of the last 6 months of learning. The average temperature and humidity of each afternoon, and how many hours I went, or how many days I went from Coke to Coke, and how I felt. I kept a diary. This is serious business. This is doing it right. And now I'm trying to apply it to this afternoon, 1 Coke or 2 Cokes. Asks the author of this essay, how do you feel when you're making that investigation? Do you feel happy, strong, optimistic, self-confident, and joyful? No, you do not. You're self-doubting, you're worried, you're concerned, you're apprehensive, maybe you'll make a mistake, maybe you won't do it right. Then your attempt to decide whether you need the second Coke to feel good is making you feel bad. Under those conditions, says the author, don't evaluate, don't investigate, just drink the second Coke. Just drink it, just take it. Because the investigation contradicts the purpose of having the Coke in the first place. I think you begin to understand that this is a pretty serious business. It's a pretty serious business. Now the question is, why? Why is it important to satisfy your psychological needs? And maybe this isn't the whole answer, but one important piece of the answer is this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants maximum service, and maximum service includes both quantity and quality. And the quality of your service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu depends in large extent on the state of your psychology. Because he wants things to be done not by the motion of your limbs. He wants you to have certain attitudes. He wants you to have certain values. He wants you to have a certain emotional element to the service. And if your psychology is not ideal, then the quality of your service will not be ideal. Now let me give you an example that I heard from my Rebbe Zatzal, which is a pshat in the Gemara, which is worth knowing. Other people have other explanations of the Gemara, but this is worthwhile. Worthwhile also. It says that when Joseph communicated with Jacob, when Joseph was viceroy in Egypt, Jacob had thought that he died. And he communicated and said, I'm still alive. I'm inviting you down to Egypt because the famine is going to continue. And Jacob agreed to come, comes on his way down, and Joseph travels to meet his father. And the Torah tells us that when they met, they embraced, and he cried on his neck. Yeah, now who's he and who's his? So in fact, the commentators are split, but the majority opinion is that Jacob cried let me get this straight. Yeah, Jacob cried on Joseph's neck. No, I'm sorry. I got mixed up. Joseph cried on Jacob's neck. Joseph was crying. Only Joseph was crying, not Jacob. So the question is raised, for whom is this more emotional meeting? After all, Joseph knew that Joseph was alive. He was alive. Jacob thought he was dead. Now all of a sudden his son is still alive, and he comes to embrace him. Wouldn't you think that emotionally this would be a much more powerful experience for Jacob than for Joseph? You might expect that they would both cry. In the Tanakh, men cry. It's an open thing. It's a tragedy. One of the tragedies of our culture, men can't cry. But why would it be that Joseph is crying and Jacob isn't? Crying for joy. So my Rebbe Zatzal explained as follows. During the 20 years that Jacob was mourning for Joseph, he didn't have prophecy. He didn't have prophecy because prophecy requires a person to be in a state of joy, and he didn't have the state of joy appropriate for prophecy. I have heard people speak, I think, loosely about his being depressed. I would avoid that word by the plague. First of all, that word has been captured by psychologists, and therefore it's in prison and probably shouldn't be used at all. And it has clinical connotations and so forth and so on, and none of that, I believe, is true with respect to Jacob. But he didn't have the level of joy that was necessary for prophecy. Now, during that period of time, Jacob said the Shema twice a day. Jacob kept the laws of the Torah that he knew, just like Abraham and Isaac did. When you say the Shema, you offer yourself, as we spoke about tefillah a few weeks ago, you offer yourself to Kodesh Baruch Hu. I am your servant. I belong to you. I'm dedicated to you. How much do you offer? Hopefully you offer all of yourself. How much is that? How much is all of yourself? It depends upon how much you are. If you are more, then it's more. And if you are less, then it's less. And when Jacob didn't have that level of joy, so that he didn't have prophecy, he was less. And therefore, when he said Shema and offered himself to Kodesh Baruch Hu, the offering was a smaller offering. Now he hears that his son is alive. And he's going to greet him. And he's anticipating the joy that he's going to feel when he embraces his son. And he's saying to himself, what do I want to do with that joy? And here's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says the reason he didn't cry is because he was saying Shema. He's saying Shema. And the reader thinks, really, he was saying Shema? Why was he doing that? You know, it's twice a day, and in the morning you have 3 hours in which you can say Shema. Surely he could have chosen a different time to say Shema. And the answer is he chose this moment to say Shema because then he'll offer himself to Kodesh Baruch Hu and he'll be more. And since he'll be more, the offering will be a bigger offering, an offering that he hasn't made in 20 years. He's looking forward to that opportunity. This is an example of how your psychology affects the quality of the service that you do for a Kodesh Baruch Hu. So investing, taking time off from Torah study to go through the activities which will strengthen your psychology is an investment in improving your service of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And now, if you think about it, that's not so different from where we started from, taking off time to sleep, because without sleep you can't learn. So your learning of your service of Kodesh Baruch Hu will be better learning if you sleep. Comes out that this is in the same ballpark, same principle, that you'll improve the service of a Kodesh Baruch Hu that you will have. You imagine a person who's irritated, self-doubting, anxious, and worried, and he interacts with someone who needs empathy. How much space does he have to empathize with the other person? He's worried about himself. That's going to eat into the psychological space that he has to reach out and deal with the other person in a useful way. So all of this is going to, what about his prayer? What about his enjoying Shabbos? When you're worried and anxious and self-doubting and so forth and so on. So when you come to Shabbos, if you're filled with worries, that's why you're supposed to, it says, in 6 days you should complete all your work. So the cautious reader says, really? You mean that's it? Work for 1 week and it's over? I can coast the rest of my life? Well, of course not. Next week you will have work to do. But it should be as if you completed all your work. Really? Listen, I'm negotiating a contract on Tuesday. What do you mean? Right? It's a challenging thing. I remember when I was an undergraduate and I was becoming religious, and after I was trying to keep Shabbos, and it came to the first exam period, and I thought to myself, what am I going to do? Am I going to study for these exams on Shabbos or not? I didn't make a decision because I was doubtful that I had the strength to not study. Came Friday night, and we had a communal meal, and we sang songs, and we studied some texts. Fine. Shabbos morning, sleep a little bit later, go to shul, daven, have a meal. Afternoon, before I knew it, Shabbos was over. I thought to myself, hey, what happened? I forgot all about my exams. I thought, hey, that's good. That's good. During Shabbos, in my mind, there were no exams. It was just Shabbos. I had climbed into that mental slot without even knowing it. So if I had been studying on Shabbos, then my concern about doing well on the exams would have been part of my Shabbos experience, and it wouldn't have been as joyful as it was without that. So your mental set has a great deal to do with the quality of the service that you can do, and that's why, one of the reasons why, it's appropriate to service your psychological needs. Are we together so far? Now, there's a special message here for caregivers. Volba wrote an essay for men who are engaged to get married, and he has some very tough things to say there. And one of the things he says is that yeshiva life typically is a training in, how should I put it, self-centered irresponsibility. Right? You don't earn any money. You don't do your clothes. You don't cook your meals. Everything's done for you. Okay, you have to come on time to learn, and you have to make an effort in learning, so forth and so on. But all the rest, and certainly, you do very little for other people. So, you're not used to what that is to be a caregiver. But people have this, for example, with older parents who find it difficult to take care of their own needs, or special needs children who also need a special amount of input and effort. And the following, I say, mental trap is something that many people in that position fall into. Nobody loves this person more than I do. I'm this person's child, I'm this person's parent, and therefore nobody can give the care for this person that I can give. And therefore, only I should give care. Because if I hand it over to somebody else, the care is going to be inferior. How can I, loving this person, tolerate the idea that the care the person will get will be inferior care? Of course, I have other responsibilities as well, and caring for this person really is draining and it's exhausting. But how can I turn it over responsibility to someone else? I'll be cheating the person that I love. The result of which is the caregiver becomes more and more tired, and then the caregiver's care also begins to deteriorate. Please, it's disturbing people. And then the caregiver thinks, so I'm cheating my loved one even worse because I'm giving less appropriate care. And he then becomes down on himself. He feels guilty and a failure, which then depresses him more and then eats into his care even more. It's a downward spiral. The trick is to stop the spiral at the first step. If I give over the care of my loved one, let's say 3 hours a day, to someone else, then all the other hours that I spend with my loved one will be a much higher quality care. And therefore it's appropriate to give it over to someone so the time that I spend with them will be as high quality care as possible. Okay, 3 hours, 1 hour, I'm not making a quantitative judgment. But the idea that you're cheating the loved one by not giving all the care is similar to the idea I'm cheating God when I sleep because he told me to serve him all the time. 7 hours out of 24, I don't serve him. But he created you in such a way that you need to sleep in order to serve him, certainly with the high quality that he wants. So that he's telling you, I want you to do this. Even more, maybe we'll talk about the fact that also is service of a Kodesh Baruch. But that's an extra point here. So this idea of taking care of your psychological needs is something which applies particularly for caregivers whose love and responsibility might blind them to the fact that it's appropriate for them to take care of those needs. Now, I want to give you some examples of this, where this was actually done, just to give you an idea of the variety of of examples. So you'll see that it really is. There's a lot of variety. And yeah.
Question: if the person poorly perceives their psychological needs as needs instead of as social, no, so basically society is influencing them in such a way that wouldn't be natural, but would be. So like, let's say, for example, a woman who, as you said, you brought out the example of a scar, right? And the need to cosmetically cover it up because it causes psychological distress.
Right.
Many women would look, for example, at modern day social media, feel inferior to other women who are more beautiful than them, and then their psychology suffers, and they need to get surgical implants or
Yes, very
that's
good.
A downward spiral.
I think that's a very good example. The psychological need is not just that, I'm having trouble focusing because I'm up to too many hours. No, your relationships with other people definitely are a psychological need. I'm not validating social media, far from it, but let's just say when you go to a gathering and you're embarrassed to be seen the way you look, then it's appropriate to do something to relieve that embarrassment, of course.
But doesn't that promote a sort of feeling of inadequacy towards yourself at all times? Like you look at other people, you say, "Oh, my lips aren't big enough, so I get fillers. My cheekbones aren't high enough, I get cheekbone extensions."
Listen, that's like saying, if you make,
for men.
if you're careful to make sure in this country in the summer to have 6 glasses of water a day, you might come to have 30 glasses of water a day and do yourself harm. It might happen. Yeah, it might happen. But it doesn't follow that there's automatically a slippery slope, that if you care about anything, you'll automatically go over the limit beyond which it's reasonable and injure yourself that way.
Seems to be a big issue these days.
It's a big issue because of social media.
Right. But
Okay.
That's the perceived psychological
But
distress of the person.
correct. And there, I think the deep psychological need is to stop the social media. Okay.
So how does a person? How
So
can a person navigate?
okay. So I think that at the beginning, the person has to take seriously the needs that they have in order to be able to have a life on social media which supports them, but they have to take measures to improve their needs. The needs are not biological, and the needs are dependent upon their behavior. So if they see that it's monopolizing their time, and for a lot it is, no question about it. Well, then the prescription of health is you have to reduce those features in your environment which provoke those needs. But in the meantime, if you're going to feel depressed and morose and angry and ruin your relationships with other people, that's worse. So I would say, yeah, be concerned about your health, whatever, but look to what is driving your interest in your health and interest in your appearance, and then see whether you can reduce that, because that's costing you too much. Now, let me give you some examples. A friend of mine, an acquaintance of mine, was at the beach in Tel Aviv. This was a separate beach. And he saw an elderly gentleman there in a beach chair, looking at the ocean, just looking at it. No grandchildren. He didn't go swimming. And this friend of mine is an American without much social grace. So he goes over to this older gentleman with a beard, and he asked him what he's doing there. I know the name of the person, but I'm not going to say it because I have the right to say it, but it was someone everyone would recognize his name. And he said, "I am a Jewish law decisor, a posek. I answer practical halachic questions. And very often, halachic questions turn on very subtle nuances, very tiny details. So I've trained myself to think carefully into all the tiny details of every case before I make a judgment. From time to time, I come to the sea just to look at the sea, its largeness, its vastness, its power. so as to rebalance my psychology so that I don't get too completely attached to the details. He's using the aesthetics of the ocean to balance his psychology so as to be able to make more balanced legal decisions. That was one. There was a Rosh Yeshiva who lived over here in Arzebira, a quite well-known Rosh Yeshiva, and I know from people who knew him that he regularly listened to Mozart. Oh, but Rabbi, Mozart is a goy! Yeah, Mozart's a goy. And by the way, Goyim created the car that you drive in. You know, would they like to walk instead of going by car? He felt that Mozart created in him a certain emotional tone, a certain emotional focus, which he felt was valuable for the way he served the Kodesh Baruch Hu. So he listened to Mozart. There's a letter that the Chazon Ish wrote. Now, he's answering a student, so we don't have the student's letter, but we can infer from the answer what the student wrote. So I'll tell you what we infer the student wrote, and then I'll read to you a translation from part of the letter that the Chazon Ish wrote. The student wrote, it's the end of the winter trimester. It was either 5 or 6 months straight of learning, depending upon whether it was a leap year or not, and I'm exhausted. I'm physically and psychologically exhausted. And I know that it is the custom in the yeshiva world, after the end of a trimester, to have a vacation period. Coming to Pesach, 4 weeks of vacation. I'm not aware where it says in the Shulchan Aruch that there's a vacation period. Could you tell me where it's written? And I feel guilty taking off time from learning because the verse in Joshua says day and night. I feel guilty for it. What should I do? Listen to the Chazon Ish's answer. No, my dear one, he writes to this student who was a stranger. No, my dear one, that there is here no sin or guilt. It is the law of nature to become tired, and it is not appropriate to despise nature. You could take this and put it up on your wall. There's a lot of deep thoughts here. It's not appropriate to despise nature. Why? For what we call nature is just the more constant aspect of Hashem's will. So if when you make a long effort over a sustained period you get tired, it means it's Hashem's will that you get tired. Therefore, now listen to this, you are obligated to stop learning entirely for 2 weeks. Oh, man. One of the world's greatest Torah scholars. You're obligated to stop learning entirely for 2 weeks. Eat well, sleep more, travel, and other matters of, I'm glad you're all sitting down. Here comes the closest thing in yeshiva language to a swear word. Other matters of batala. He uses the word batala. Batala means doing nothing. Doing nothing. Eat well, sleep more, travel, and other matters of batala. Happy are you that you toiled in Torah and grew weak over it. Other people toil and they go weak and they have to recover their strength, not toiling in Torah. And at the end of the letter he says, if you have any difficulty in following my instructions, come here to me. I'll make sure that you follow the instructions. And he says one other thing. He says, the Chazon Ish writes to this student, you wrote me Torah ideas in your letter. I'm not answering them. Because if the Chazon Ish answers them, then he'll want to answer back, and he'll be drawn back in. How thorough can you get? How pointed can you get? This is letter number 35 in the collected letters of the Chazon Ish. So, the last thing that I want to say is that a person was trying to be realistic about his needs. There are really 2 voices going on in his head. Maybe there are 16, but there are 2 at least. And one says, gee, I think I need this because if I don't get it, I can see that they're going to be but I shouldn't be so weak. I shouldn't be so dependent. I shouldn't be so needy. The important thing here is to make sure you understand that both are right. Both are right. Yes, you would be better off if you would be less needy. Yes, there are things that you can do that will enable you to grow to be less needy. And it's a valuable thing to do. But it's also true that the needs that you have now are the needs that you have now. And these prescriptions that I read to you are meant to make sure that you take seriously the needs that you have now, so that now you can invest in the quality of your service of the Kodesh Baruch. I'll tell you two stories, both of which came to me as a question. One was a fellow, he's about tshuva, his wife's about tshuva, and they had, I think, 3 children at the time, and they were saving up to buy a Talmud. Religious people, when they get married, the parents of the bride, of the Kala, buy a set of the Talmud for the chassid. It's a beautiful gesture, investment in his learning. They came from a non-religious family, so he didn't have it. And they're saving up the money. And then the husband came to me, and then his wife said to him, I'd like to take the money that we're saving up for the Talmud and use it to redecorate the apartment. Oh my, redecorate the apartment. And he said to me, how can I convince her that we should use it to buy a copy of the Talmud? So I said to him, what would you say if your wife told you that she's suffering from migraine headaches, and the only medicine that works, some medicine comes from Switzerland, and it's very expensive, and the money you save to buy a copy of the Talmud has to go for that medicine? What would you say? Migraine headaches? Of course, no question. We buy the medicine. So I said to him, so if she has the physical pain of headaches, then there's no question in your mind that you should spend the money on it. But if she tells you that being home in this drab, ugly apartment makes her depressed, makes her anxious and depressed, that's okay. You don't have to worry about that. Why aren't you as concerned about your wife's psychological health as you are about her physical health? And I let him meditate on that. Another example, a woman came to me. They were living in Bayit Vegan in a walk-up. She has 2 children. She said, I do the shopping. My husband's in Koilel. But let me tell you, going to the Makolet with 2 children and then carrying the bundles home and making the trips up the stairs and so forth and so on is very difficult. Shall I call my husband out of Koilel once or twice a week to help me with the shopping? So I said to her, it depends. What the difference will be if you don't. Is it that, well, let's see, if he comes and helps me with the bundles, then at night when I get into bed, I take up the novel that I'm reading, I'll be able to read 3 chapters. But if he doesn't help me, then when I get into bed at night and open up the novel that I'm reading, I'll only be able to read 1 chapter. If there's a difference between reading 1 chapter and 3 chapters, you probably shouldn't invite him home. Invite him to help you with it. But if you're going to be tired, and you're going to be short with the children, and you're going to be irritated, and it's going to be hard to put on a smile when your husband comes home, then have him come home and help him. Because that consequence for you isn't worth protecting his learning for that period of time. So it all depends upon what the actual consequences are going to be. The bottom line is the fact that it's psychological rather than physical plays no role in these calculations. I'm going to leave this here because it has the notes on it. It's actually on my website also. I have when I first came, I used to hand out outlines for all the shiurim that I gave. And then I saw that people began to lose interest in it. The outlines for a lot of my lectures are on my website, and they have the sources in it. So this is really the bottom line: to take your psychological needs seriously, because that's an investment in the way you serve a Kodesh Baruch. Okay.